Some people mistake a badge for permission to stop seeing humanity. Rain drifted softly across downtown Chicago while traffic lights reflected red and gold against wet pavement crowded with late-night taxis, buses, and impatient pedestrians trying to escape the cold November wind. But outside a convenience store near West Monroe Street, dozens of strangers suddenly slowed their steps after hearing the sharp voice of Officer Ryan Cole echo across the sidewalk with aggressive authority. "Put your hands where I can see them now," Ryan barked loudly while standing beside a black police cruiser, his hand resting near his belt as several younger officers watched from nearby with nervous anticipation, and directly in front of him stood a tall black man wearing a charcoal overcoat and dark leather gloves, calm enough to immediately irritate Ryan even more. The man slowly raised his hands without argument while city rain collected across the shoulders of his coat beneath the flashing patrol lights, and despite the growing crowd around them, his expression remained remarkably controlled, almost detached, as though he understood something nobody else there did yet. "You fit the description," Ryan snapped impatiently while circling closer. Though in truth dispatch had given only a vague report involving a suspicious vehicle several blocks away and no clear suspect identification whatsoever. But Ryan had already convinced himself this man belonged inside the story he wanted to tell. Imagine standing in the middle of a crowded city street, while strangers point phones toward your face and police officers treat your calmness like guilt simply because your skin makes someone uncomfortable. Because the people gathering outside the store could already feel the tension spreading through the sidewalk even before anyone understood what was happening. The black man glanced briefly toward the growing crowd of live-streaming phones before speaking in a calm, steady voice completely opposite Ryan's rising aggression. "Officer, I have already explained that vehicle belongs to me," he said quietly. But Ryan immediately stepped closer as though composure itself offended him. "Turn around," Ryan ordered sharply while younger officers exchanged uncertain looks nearby, and several pedestrians stopped completely now, filming openly beneath the rain as the scene escalated into public humiliation. The man obeyed without resistance, slowly placing his coffee cup onto the hood of the patrol car before turning carefully toward the vehicle while cold rain rolled down the side of his face. And for one brief moment Ryan smirked slightly, because nothing feeds insecure authority faster than forcing dignity to stand still beneath public attention. Metal handcuffs clicked loudly enough for nearby phones to capture the sound clearly overpassing traffic while murmurs spread through the crowd, and still the man never raised his voice, never struggled, never reacted emotionally the way Ryan seemed almost disappointed he would not. "You think you are smarter than everybody else?" Ryan muttered while tightening his grip on the situation for the benefit of the watching crowd and younger officers nearby. But the man simply stared ahead at the glowing Chicago skyline, reflecting through rain-soaked windows across the street. Several bystanders quietly questioned the stop, while live-stream comments exploded online in real time, asking why the man was being detained when he appeared completely cooperative. And somewhere near the edge of the crowd, one young woman whispered nervously, "This does not look right." Yet Ryan ignored all of it because people intoxicated by public authority often confuse embarrassment with control. Then suddenly one of the younger officers stepped closer, holding a department tablet, with visible hesitation on her face. Her eyes shifting back and forth between Ryan and the detained man as though she recognized something she was afraid to say aloud. "Officer Cole," she said quietly above the rain, "I think you should look at this." But Ryan barely glanced toward her because his attention remained locked on the silent black man standing handcuffed beneath the flashing patrol lights of a city that had not yet realized it was watching a career collapse in real time. Rainwater continued sliding down the windows of nearby storefronts, while downtown Chicago traffic crawled through the wet streets beneath flashing patrol lights. And standing beside the police cruiser with cold metal cuffs around his wrists, the black man remained calmer than anyone else at the scene despite dozens of strangers filming him from every angle with their phones. Officer Ryan Cole ignored the growing discomfort spreading through the crowd because his attention stayed fixed on, proving he controlled the situation, and somewhere deep beneath his confidence lived the dangerous belief that authority mattered more than accuracy. "Step back and stop recording," Ryan barked towards several bystanders gathered near the curb. But the live streams continued anyway, because once public humiliation begins in a city full of cameras, it rarely stays private for long. The young female officer holding the department tablet hesitated again before moving closer to Ryan beneath the rain, and this time her voice sounded more urgent. "Officer Cole, I really think you need to read this now," she said quietly, while keeping her eyes fixed on the screen. Ryan finally turned toward her with visible irritation and snatched the tablet from her hands before glancing down impatiently, expecting another routine dispatch update. But the moment his eyes landed on the department email displayed across the screen, his expression shifted almost invisibly for half a second. The email contained an internal leadership announcement sent earlier that morning to every officer in the district, complete with photograph, title, and arrival notice for the city's newly appointed deputy chief. Imagine standing handcuffed in the middle of a crowded street, while the officer humiliating you slowly realizes he never bothered learning who you actually were before judging you. Because the silent black man beside the cruiser already understood exactly what Ryan was seeing reflected in the glow of that screen. "What is that?" one younger officer asked nervously while rain tapped against the hood of the patrol car. But Ryan immediately locked the tablet screen and shoved it back toward the female officer as though hiding the information could somehow erase it. "It is nothing," Ryan snapped too quickly before turning back toward the detained man with forced aggression. And now even the crowd could feel something changing in the atmosphere, because confidence built on assumptions often starts cracking the moment facts appear. The black man slowly lifted his eyes toward Ryan for the first time since the stop began, and despite the cuffs around his wrists and dozens of cameras recording his humiliation, there was still no fear in his expression, only disappointment, calm, controlled disappointment that somehow unsettled Ryan more than anger ever could. "Officer," the man said quietly, "you still have time to slow this down before it becomes something larger than you understand." But Ryan immediately stepped closer again, because insecure men often mistake calm advice for disrespect. "Do not threaten me," Ryan fired back sharply, while several livestream viewers shouted reactions from nearby phones. And one older man standing beneath a bus stop shelter shook his head slowly before muttering, "This officer is about to ruin his own life." Traffic continued moving around the scene while Chicago skyscrapers reflected through the rain-soaked streets like blurred mirrors, watching everything unfold in real time. And somewhere in the growing crowd, a local journalist recognized the face of the detained man from an earlier city leadership press release. The reporter lowered her phone slightly with widening eyes before immediately typing messages into her newsroom group chat. Meanwhile, the female officer stepped closer to Ryan one final time, her voice now barely above a whisper. "That is Deputy Chief Marcus Ellison," she warned carefully. "The new commander starts Monday." For one brief second, Ryan froze completely beneath the flashing patrol lights while cold rain rolled down the side of his face. But instead of stepping back or admitting the mistake, his pride hardened even further, because some people would rather double down publicly than survive embarrassment privately. Marcus Ellison quietly watched the internal battle unfolding behind Ryan's eyes, while city sirens echoed somewhere deeper through downtown Chicago. And then, in the distance, a black department SUV slowly turned onto West Monroe Street, heading directly toward the growing crowd. The black department SUV rolled slowly through the rain-soaked intersection toward the growing crowd, while flashing patrol lights painted red and blue reflections across downtown Chicago storefronts. And standing handcuffed beside the cruiser, Deputy Chief Marcus Ellison watched the vehicle approach with the same calm expression he had maintained since the humiliation began. Around him, dozens of strangers continued live streaming the scene, while comments flooded social media in real time. Some angry, some confused, and others already recognizing Marcus from the city press release announcing his arrival earlier that morning. Officer Ryan Cole noticed the SUV too, and for the first time that night, genuine uncertainty crept visibly across his face, because deep down he already understood what was about to happen. But pride still kept him trapped inside the role he created for himself in front of the crowd. "Stay where you are," Ryan snapped loudly toward Marcus, even though Marcus had not moved an inch since the handcuffs clicked around his wrists, and nearby younger officers exchanged nervous glances because the situation no longer felt like routine policing. It felt like public collapse unfolding in slow motion. Imagine standing in the rain while strangers record your humiliation and the person humiliating you realizes too late that he never actually knew who he was judging. Because Marcus could feel the atmosphere shifting around him now, the crowd growing quieter, officers speaking softer, uncertainty spreading faster than authority. The SUV finally stopped beside the curb, and two command staff officers stepped out beneath the cold Chicago rain. Their expressions serious until one of them looked directly toward the handcuffed man standing beside Ryan's patrol vehicle. Then everything changed instantly. "Deputy Chief Ellison?" the older captain said with visible disbelief before quickly moving closer through the crowd. And the moment those words reached nearby phones and livestream microphones, the entire sidewalk seemed to freeze beneath the flashing lights. Ryan's face drained of color almost immediately, while several younger officers stared openly at Marcus with shock, because the man they watched being publicly humiliated for the last 20 minutes was not a suspect at all. He was the new second highest ranking commander in their district. Marcus slowly turned toward the captain while rain rolled quietly down the side of his charcoal coat. And despite the cuffs still around his wrists and the cameras surrounding him from every angle, his voice remained calm and controlled. "Good evening, Captain Mercer," he said softly. Captain Mercer looked from Marcus to the handcuffs, then toward Ryan, and the disappointment that crossed his face somehow felt heavier than anger. "Officer Cole," Mercer said carefully, "why is the deputy chief restrained?" But Ryan struggled to answer because every explanation that sounded reasonable in his head earlier now collapsed beneath the reality standing directly in front of him. He matched suspicious activity dispatch notes, Ryan muttered weakly while rainwater dripped from his uniform collar. But even nearby civilians began reacting openly now, several shaking their heads while livestream viewers flooded comment sections demanding accountability. One young officer standing near the cruiser quietly lowered her eyes because she recognized the exact moment a career starts breaking apart publicly. Captain Mercer stepped closer toward Marcus, immediately reaching for the handcuffs, while internal affairs investigators arriving behind the SUV began observing the scene with growing concern. And somewhere across the street a reporter whispered into her microphone, "The man detained by officers appears to be Deputy Chief Marcus Ellison himself." Marcus looked calmly toward Ryan while the cuffs were finally removed from his wrists. And for one long, uncomfortable second neither man spoke, because sometimes silence exposes truth more painfully than words ever can. Ryan avoided eye contact completely now while the rain continued falling around them, and livestream cameras captured every second of his confidence collapsing beneath public scrutiny. Then Captain Mercer quietly asked the question nobody there wanted to answer. "Officer Cole, did you ever verify who he was before placing him in cuffs?" And suddenly downtown Chicago no longer sounded loud at all. Rain continued falling across downtown Chicago while the crowd surrounding the patrol cars grew larger with every passing minute. And now the atmosphere felt completely different from earlier, because the people recording with their phones were no longer watching an officer control a situation. They were watching authority collapse beneath its own arrogance in real time. Deputy Chief Marcus Ellison stood quietly beside the cruiser, rubbing his wrists after the handcuffs were removed while water dripped from the edges of his charcoal coat onto the wet pavement below. And despite everything that had just happened to him publicly, his posture never lost composure for even a second. Officer Ryan Cole remained frozen near the patrol vehicle, with Captain Mercer staring directly at him beneath flashing emergency lights, while internal affairs investigators quietly began speaking with nearby officers and reviewing body camera timestamps. "Answer the question," Mercer said firmly over the sound of passing traffic and distant sirens. "Did you verify who he was before detaining him?" But Ryan struggled to respond because every explanation now sounded smaller than the damage already done. Imagine standing in front of a crowd realizing the man you humiliated in public has more authority, more discipline, and more control than you ever did, while wearing the badge you thought made you untouchable, because Ryan could feel the weight of hundreds of eyes watching him differently now. Dispatch mentioned suspicious activity near a luxury SUV, Ryan finally muttered weakly while rain rolled down the side of his face. But even younger officers nearby knew the explanation sounded thin because there had never been enough evidence to justify turning the stop into a public spectacle. One internal affairs investigator stepped closer holding a tablet displaying synchronized body camera footage while another officer quietly confirmed that Marcus had cooperated calmly from the very beginning of the encounter. Deputy Chief Ellison identified himself twice. The investigator stated carefully, and Officer Cole escalated anyway. The crowd reacted immediately with frustrated murmurs while livestream comments exploded online, and somewhere near the back of the sidewalk a young man shook his head before saying loudly. He treated him like a threat before he even knew anything about him. Marcus listened silently while city lights reflected across rain-soaked streets behind him. And although humiliation still lingered beneath the surface of the moment, there was something stronger in his expression now. Disappointment not just in Ryan, but in a system that allowed fear and assumptions to wear the appearance of professionalism. Captain Mercer glanced toward Marcus with visible regret before speaking quietly. "Sir, I apologize for what happened tonight." But Marcus slowly shook his head because apologies alone could not erase the deeper truth exposed there in front of the entire city. This was not just one mistake, Marcus said calmly while several livestream cameras focused on him beneath the rain. Mistakes happen once. Assumptions happen repeatedly. The words hit harder than shouting because everyone there understood exactly what he meant. Ryan lowered his eyes for the first time all night, while internal affairs investigators continued collecting statements nearby. And now the younger officers who admired his confidence earlier avoided standing near him entirely, because the illusion of authority disappears quickly once people recognize recklessness hiding beneath it. Then one investigator stepped toward Captain Mercer holding official dispatch records printed moments earlier, and after reviewing the timeline carefully, Mercer's face tightened immediately. The original suspicious vehicle report was cleared before Officer Cole initiated detainment, he said quietly. And the silence that followed felt painfully heavy because now the entire encounter appeared not just unnecessary, but completely avoidable from the beginning. Marcus looked briefly toward the crowd still filming from beneath umbrellas and storefront awnings before turning back toward Ryan. And when he finally spoke again, his voice remained calm enough to make the moment even more uncomfortable. "You never saw me as a citizen first," Marcus said softly. "You saw me as a problem you wanted to control." Rain continued falling steadily around the flashing patrol lights while downtown Chicago seemed to hold its breath. And standing there beneath hundreds of watching eyes, Ryan Cole finally realized the most dangerous thing about abusing authority is that eventually the truth arrives with witnesses. Downtown Chicago no longer felt like an ordinary city street because now every flashing patrol light, every raised phone camera, and every whisper moving through the rain-soaked crowd carried the tension of a moment nobody there would forget. Deputy Chief Marcus Ellison stood quietly beneath the glow of storefront lights, while internal affairs investigators reviewed body camera footage beside the patrol cars. And although the handcuffs were gone from his wrists, the emotional weight of public humiliation still lingered invisibly around him like cold air after a storm. Officer Ryan Cole remained near the curb with water dripping steadily from his uniform, while younger officers avoided even looking in his direction now. And somewhere deep behind his silence, the reality finally began settling in. Not just that he detained the wrong man, but that he exposed exactly how quickly assumptions controlled his judgment. Imagine realizing your authority was never protecting the public at all, but protecting your own fear of people you decided looked suspicious before they even spoke, because the crowd surrounding the scene could feel the truth spreading through the atmosphere stronger than the rain itself. Captain Mercer continued speaking quietly with internal affairs while reporters pushed closer against police barricades trying to capture every detail, and nearby live-stream viewers watched comments flood endlessly across screens, demanding accountability from the department. One investigator approached Marcus respectfully, holding a tablet, displaying synchronized body camera footage from multiple officers, and after reviewing several clips carefully beneath the flashing lights, she looked visibly disturbed by the consistency of Ryan's behavior throughout the encounter. There was no escalation from Deputy Chief Ellison at any point, she stated firmly while several nearby officers listened in silence. No resistance, no threatening behavior, no lawful justification for continued detention. The words landed heavily because everyone standing there had already watched Marcus remain calm, while Ryan repeatedly escalated the situation anyway. Ryan finally attempted to defend himself again, his voice lower now, stripped of the confidence it carried earlier. "I followed instinct based on suspicious circumstances," he muttered weakly. But even he no longer sounded convinced by his own explanation. Marcus slowly turned toward him beneath the cold Chicago rain while distant traffic echoed through the city streets around them. And for several seconds he simply studied Ryan quietly, not with hatred, but with the disappointment of someone who expected better from the uniform standing in front of him. "Instinct is supposed to protect people," Marcus said softly, "not replace procedure." The crowd fell almost completely silent after hearing that, because simple truth spoken calmly often cuts deeper than public outrage ever can. Nearby, the young female officer who first recognized Marcus lowered her eyes, visibly uncomfortable as guilt spread through several younger officers standing nearby. Because many of them now understood they stayed silent too long while watching Ryan push the encounter further and further beyond reason. One older man recording the incident from beneath an umbrella quietly shook his head before saying, "This is exactly why people stop trusting the system." And even some officers nearby could not deny the truth in his words anymore. Then Captain Mercer stepped forward, holding an official department envelope handed to him moments earlier by Internal Affairs. And the entire emotional atmosphere shifted immediately because everyone watching understood something final was about to happen. Ryan looked toward the envelope and suddenly seemed smaller somehow beneath the flashing patrol lights. Smaller than the authority he wore earlier. Smaller than the fear he projected onto Marcus. Smaller than the consequences finally arriving in front of hundreds of livestream viewers. "Officer Ryan Cole," Mercer said firmly while rainwater rolled off the brim of his cap. "Pending full investigation into misconduct, unlawful detention, and procedural violations, you are relieved of duty effective immediately." The crowd reacted instantly with stunned murmurs while livestream comments exploded online. But Marcus never smiled because moments like this were never victories to him. Ryan slowly unclipped his badge from his rain-soaked uniform with trembling hands before placing it into Mercer's palm. And as the sound of distant sirens echoed through downtown Chicago, Marcus quietly looked toward the crowd recording everything before speaking one final sentence that seemed to freeze the entire street in place. "A badge does not become dangerous when it loses power," he said softly. "It becomes dangerous when it forgets humanity first." Rain finally began slowing above downtown Chicago, but the emotional storm surrounding West Monroe Street only seemed to grow heavier as livestream clips of Officer Ryan Cole surrendering his badge spread across social media faster than anyone at the scene could control. Deputy Chief Marcus Ellison stood quietly beside the patrol cruiser while reporters continued shouting questions from behind police barricades. And although the crowd expected anger from him after everything that happened publicly, Marcus carried himself with the same measured calm that unsettled people far more than rage ever could. The city lights reflecting across the wet pavement gave the entire street a strange cinematic stillness now, as though everyone there understood they had just witnessed something larger than a simple disciplinary action. They witnessed the exact moment unchecked assumptions collided with accountability in front of the entire public. Imagine spending your life believing authority automatically makes someone respectable only to realize true authority is revealed by how people treat others when they think nobody important is watching. Because Marcus understood that tonight exposed far more than one reckless officer. It exposed a mindset quietly tolerated for too long inside the system itself. Captain Mercer continued coordinating with internal affairs investigators while several younger officers stood silently nearby replaying body camera footage on department tablets. And every clip showed the same painful reality. Marcus remained calm, while Ryan repeatedly escalated tension, searching for justification that never existed. One young officer finally spoke softly to another beside the cruiser. He never resisted once. And the second officer lowered his eyes immediately because deep down many of them recognized they watched the situation spiral earlier without stepping forward fast enough to stop it. Meanwhile, Ryan sat alone in the back seat of a supervisor vehicle parked near the curb, no longer restrained by authority or ego but trapped instead by the weight of public exposure. And through the rain-covered window, he watched live streamers continue recording outside, while headlines about the incident already appeared across local news alerts on nearby phones. For the first time all night, nobody moved around Ryan carefully or treated him like the center of the situation, because once power disappears, silence becomes brutally honest. Marcus slowly walked toward the edge of the sidewalk where several civilians still stood beneath umbrellas discussing what they witnessed, and one older black woman looked at him with sadness before quietly saying, "You stayed calmer than most people could have." And Marcus paused for a moment before answering with the same quiet discipline that carried him through the humiliation earlier. "Calmness is not weakness," he said softly. "Sometimes it is the only thing protecting your dignity." The woman nodded silently, while nearby livestream viewers flooded comment sections repeating his words across social media platforms throughout the city. Then one of the internal affairs investigators approached Marcus holding a printed preliminary review summary already prepared from dispatch logs and body camera analysis. And after speaking quietly with Captain Mercer for several moments, she turned toward Marcus with visible sincerity in her expression. "Deputy Chief Ellison," she said respectfully, "formal misconduct proceedings are being initiated immediately." Marcus accepted the information with a slow nod, but showed no satisfaction because punishment alone could never erase the deeper damage caused when people stop seeing humanity before suspicion. Across the street, a large electronic billboard reflected shifting advertisements across the rain-soaked pavement, while city buses rolled slowly past the growing crowd still gathered around flashing patrol lights, and somewhere in the distance church bells echoed faintly through the cold Chicago night. Ryan finally stepped out of the supervisor vehicle under escort to retrieve personal belongings from his patrol car, and as he crossed the sidewalk beneath hundreds of watching eyes, nobody shouted at him, nobody mocked him, because disappointment from strangers often feels heavier than hatred. Marcus watched quietly as Ryan removed family photographs and notebooks from the cruiser console with visibly trembling hands. And for a brief moment, Ryan glanced toward Marcus as though hoping for anger, confrontation, anything easier than the calm disappointment staring back at him. But Marcus only spoke one quiet sentence while rainwater continued dripping from city rooftops around them. "The uniform was supposed to teach you discipline before authority." And somehow those words followed Ryan more heavily than the cameras ever could. The rain finally stopped just before midnight, leaving downtown Chicago covered in reflections from neon signs, traffic lights, and fading police sirens. But the emotional aftermath surrounding West Monroe Street continued spreading far beyond the crowded intersection because livestream clips of Deputy Chief Marcus Ellison standing calmly in handcuffs had now reached millions of viewers across the country. Inside police stations throughout the city, officers watched the footage replay repeatedly on break room televisions and department computers, while uncomfortable silence settled over rooms usually filled with jokes and routine conversations, because deep down many of them recognized something painful in what happened that night. The difference between policing danger and projecting fear onto someone simply because assumptions felt easier than discipline. Marcus sat quietly inside Captain Mercer's SUV, parked a short distance from the crowd, while internal affairs continued collecting statements outside. And through the rain-streaked window, he watched young officers moving more carefully now, speaking softer, avoiding eye contact whenever they passed the spot where he had stood restrained beneath the flashing patrol lights earlier. Imagine spending your career protecting the reputation of a badge only to realize the greatest threat to it comes from people wearing it without self-control, because Marcus understood this moment would follow the department long after headlines disappeared. Captain Mercer sat across from him reviewing preliminary reports with visible exhaustion across his face before finally lowering the paperwork onto his lap. "Sir, the mayor's office already called twice," he admitted quietly. "The commissioner wants an emergency review before sunrise." Marcus nodded slowly but showed little surprise, because public trust collapses quickly once people witness humiliation carried out confidently against someone who did nothing wrong. Outside, the SUV reporters continued broadcasting live updates while civilians gathered beneath storefront awnings discussing what they witnessed earlier. And among the crowd, a teenage boy replayed the live stream footage on his phone beside his father before asking quietly, would they have treated him the same way if he was white? The father hesitated before answering because some questions reveal truths people spend years trying not to confront. Meanwhile, Ryan Cole sat alone inside a nearly empty administrative office several blocks away after being transported from the scene. still wearing his damp uniform, while his surrendered badge rested inside an evidence envelope on the desk nearby. And for the first time in years, there was nobody around him offering support, excuses, or admiration. The silence inside the room felt heavier than punishment, because now Ryan had nothing left to hide behind except his own decisions. He replayed fragments of the encounter repeatedly in his mind. Marcus standing calmly in the rain, the young officer warning him quietly, the crowd recording everything, Captain Mercer removing control from his hands one sentence at a time. And somewhere beneath the humiliation, a terrifying realization finally began settling into him. He had stopped seeing people clearly long before this night ever happened. Back downtown, Marcus stepped out of the SUV, while cold wind moved through the emptying streets around him, and several younger officers instinctively straightened their posture when he passed, because despite the humiliation he endured publicly, his calm authority somehow felt even stronger now. One rookie officer gathered enough courage to approach him near the sidewalk before speaking nervously. "Sir, how did you stay that calm?" Marcus looked toward the young officer beneath the glow of a nearby streetlight and paused for a moment before answering softly. "Because anger would have made tonight about me," he said quietly. Calmness kept it about the truth. The rookie nodded slowly, as though carrying the words somewhere deeper than memory, while city buses rolled quietly through the wet Chicago streets behind them. Then Marcus glanced once more toward the distant flashing lights where the encounter began hours earlier. Before speaking almost to himself, "The public can forgive mistakes," he said softly. "But they stop trusting you when mistakes start looking intentional." And somewhere inside a nearly empty office downtown, Ryan Cole sat staring silently at the evidence envelope, holding his badge, while those words echoed louder than the sirens ever did. By 3 o'clock in the morning, most of downtown Chicago had finally returned to its normal rhythm of late-night traffic and glowing skyscraper windows. But inside police headquarters, the atmosphere remained painfully tense, because every television screen, every phone notification, and every internal department message still revolved around the same viral footage of Deputy Chief Marcus Ellison standing calmly in handcuffs, while Officer Ryan Cole publicly lost control of both the situation and himself. Officers moved quietly through hallways that normally echoed with casual conversation, because nobody wanted to be associated with the incident now that the entire city had watched the body camera footage exposing exactly how quickly assumptions replaced procedure during the encounter. Marcus walked through the headquarters lobby beside Captain Mercer, while younger officers instinctively stepped aside respectfully. And despite the exhaustion visible in his eyes after the longest night of his career in Chicago so far, his posture never lost the calm discipline that unsettled people more than anger ever could. Imagine walking into the very building you were supposed to help lead after being publicly humiliated by someone beneath your command only hours earlier. Because Marcus understood, every eye following him through the lobby carried a different emotion now: guilt, shame, admiration, fear, and for some officers, painful self-reflection, inside a conference room overlooking the city skyline. Senior department officials sat reviewing footage from the incident frame by frame, while internal affairs investigators highlighted moments where Ryan ignored repeated opportunities to de-escalate the stop, verify identity, or simply listen before escalating authority publicly. One official paused the video at the exact moment Marcus calmly identified himself, while Ryan dismissed him in front of the crowd. And the silence inside the room afterward felt heavier than any shouted argument, because everyone there recognized the deeper issue hidden beneath the mistake itself. This was never about officer safety. One investigator finally admitted quietly. This was about perception controlling judgment. Meanwhile, several news stations replayed Marcus's statements from the street across local broadcasts, while commentators debated police accountability, racial profiling, and public trust. But the quote spreading fastest online was not about punishment or revenge. It was the simple moment Marcus said, "You saw me as a problem before you saw me as a person." Back inside headquarters, Ryan Cole sat alone at the far end of an administrative waiting room, still wearing the same damp uniform from earlier. And with every passing hour, the reality around him became harder to escape, because now there were no flashing lights, no crowds, no adrenaline, only silence, forcing him to confront his own decisions honestly for the first time. A television mounted high on the wall replayed the live stream clip showing Marcus standing calmly beside the cruiser while Ryan raised his voice repeatedly. And hearing himself now from the outside sounded different somehow, smaller, angrier, less controlled than he remembered in the moment. One older janitor pushing a cleaning cart slowly passed through the waiting room before glancing briefly toward Ryan and quietly saying, "The hardest thing about respect is that you cannot force people to give it to you." Ryan looked away immediately because even simple words felt unbearable now. Upstairs, Marcus stood alone beside the conference room windows watching rain clouds drift away from the Chicago skyline, while city lights reflected across Lake Michigan in the distance. And although the night had exposed ugly truths publicly, he also understood moments like this create crossroads inside institutions. Either people learn from exposure, or they spend years repeating it behind different headlines. Captain Mercer eventually stepped beside him, holding preliminary suspension paperwork and media statements waiting for approval, but before speaking about procedures or investigations, he quietly asked the question weighing on everyone in the department. "Sir, after tonight, do you still believe this city can trust us?" Marcus remained silent for several long seconds while distant sirens echoed softly through the sleeping city below. And when he finally answered, his voice carried the tired honesty of someone who spent years watching systems either improve or decay depending on the courage of the people inside them. "Trust does not disappear because officers make mistakes," Marcus said softly. "It disappears when people stop caring enough to correct them." And somewhere downstairs beneath the fluorescent lights of an empty waiting room, Ryan Cole sat staring at his reflection in a dark television screen, realizing too late that accountability always arrives eventually, especially when pride mistakes itself for authority. By sunrise, the storm over Chicago had completely disappeared, leaving the city washed clean beneath pale golden light, reflecting across glass skyscrapers and quiet downtown streets. But inside police headquarters, the emotional weight of the previous night still lingered heavily, because everyone there understood the viral footage had already changed the department in ways no official statement could fully control. Deputy Chief Marcus Ellison stood alone near the large windows overlooking Lake Michigan while early morning traffic slowly filled the streets below. And although exhaustion rested quietly beneath his eyes after hours of investigations, interviews, and public scrutiny, there was still something steady in his posture that humiliation never managed to break. Imagine being publicly handcuffed in front of thousands of strangers and still refusing to let bitterness define you afterward. Because Marcus understood something many people never learn: dignity becomes most powerful when circumstances try hardest to strip it away. Throughout the building, officers moved differently now, speaking softer in hallways, watching body camera footage more carefully, questioning decisions more honestly, and for the first time in a long while, conversations about discipline and bias no longer sounded theoretical inside briefing rooms. They sounded personal. Downstairs, Officer Ryan Cole walked slowly through the nearly empty administrative corridor, carrying a cardboard box filled with personal belongings from his locker while avoiding eye contact with everyone he passed. And without the badge on his uniform, he suddenly looked less like the confident authority figure from the night before and more like an ordinary man forced to confront the consequences of his own unchecked assumptions. No reporters followed him now. No cameras recorded him. No crowd shouted his name. Because public humiliation fades quickly once spectacle disappears, but private reflection lasts much longer. Ryan paused briefly near a television screen, replaying footage from the incident one final time before the station switched back to morning news coverage. And seeing Marcus standing calmly beneath the rain, while he himself appeared angry, impatient, and desperate for control, felt almost unbearable to watch now from the outside. A cleaning employee passed quietly beside him before saying something simple that somehow carried more weight than every official reprimand from the night before. "People respect authority more when it respects them first." Ryan lowered his eyes without answering, because deep down, he finally understood how many opportunities he ignored to slow down, listen, and treat another human being fairly before pride took over completely. Upstairs, Captain Mercer entered the conference room carrying finalized suspension documents and a stack of policy review proposals already being prepared in response to the incident. But before discussing department reforms, he looked toward Marcus with visible sincerity and asked quietly, After everything that happened, why did you stay? Marcus glanced out across the waking city beyond the windows where sunlight slowly replaced the reflections of flashing patrol lights from earlier, and after several long seconds he answered with the calm honesty that carried him through the entire night. Because walking away would be easier than fixing what is broken. Mercer nodded silently, because some forms of leadership reveal themselves most clearly after humiliation instead of before it. Later that morning, Marcus stepped outside headquarters into the cold Chicago air, where several civilians recognized him immediately from the viral videos. But instead of shouting questions or recording him, many simply nodded respectfully as he passed, because they saw not just a commander, but someone who endured public humiliation without surrendering his humanity in return. Marcus paused briefly near the edge of the sidewalk while traffic moved steadily through the city around him, and morning sunlight reflected across the streets that looked so different from the rain-soaked chaos of the night before. Then quietly, almost like a final lesson carried into the wind itself, he spoke the one truth that seemed to echo far beyond Chicago after everything the city witnessed. The badge was never meant to make someone feel powerful, he said softly. It was meant to remind them to be responsible. And somewhere behind him inside a nearly silent headquarters, those words continued lingering long after the sirens, cameras, and humiliation finally faded away.